Are we in 2027?
It does feel like the clock's moving faster than ever, but a few strange events make us think it's moving even faster than we thought. An early election.
This sounds like a great idea for politicians in sports, general politics everywhere, isn't it?
Yes, this is Alejandro Domínguez, the COMBEOL President, who wasn't due for re-election until 2027, suddenly fast-tracking it this week.
They sometimes call for like a snap election if you're popular, but normally your term starts again, the clock resets. But in this case, it looks like Domínguez's new term will start in 2 years' time. You've almost pre-selected yourself to be elected in 2 years' time. It's quite an incredible feat he's done. And he's got a letter of congratulations and everything's fine.
Congratulations from Gianni Infantino.
In terms of serious sports governance, this is pretty disgraceful because you're basically feathering your nest for years and years to come. And there's obviously no oversight. No one's like kicking up a fuss, but it's absolutely ridiculous.
Barely noticed. That's how normal some of this stuff has got. You know, in terms of, this is a big guy. This is a FIFA vice president. He's head of the Confederation, which has the World Cup winners Argentina in it, Brazil the record champions, and it's barely registered as it globally. It's just one of those things.
Like many of the things we cover on here, they can be important, but maybe some of the things don't always resonate globally. And particularly, this is a very, very busy news week, and in football terms, new Club World Cup. Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked with Martyn Ziegler from The Times, Tariq Panja from The New York Times, and myself, Rob Harris from Sky News. And if you hit subscribe, we land in your feeds automatically. And if you rate and review us, it helps spread the word. And you can listen back to an episode from a couple of weeks ago, marking 10 years since the FIFA scandal, where we talked a lot about good governance and scandals in CONMEBOL.
Plus a change, is it? I think it's fair to say. Anyone who thought that 10-year scandal was going to usher in a completely trouble-free, controversy-free football administration around the world is probably kidding themselves.
They are. Look, we'll probably get into other examples of this later, but CONMEBOL is very interesting. That was the heart of the FIFA case we discussed before, but it's only got 10 members. So it's only 10 people, or 10 people you need to please, really. So if you're the president, the incumbent, you just have to, for want of a better phrase, you used it earlier, feather the nest, I guess, of 10 national federation heads. And, Mr. Domínguez, obviously they think he's doing a good job, electing him 2 years before, the end of his term for a new 4-year term. So technically he's can be the president, I think now until 2030, something like that. 2031.
2031. The same as Gianni Infantino as well, given the adjustments or clarifications made in 2022 about his terms and when they fully began.
Alexander Schäferin, the UEFA president, who, remember that very, very stormy press conference, said he planned not to stand again, even after passing statutes that would allow him to burst through the 12-year term limit. Now we've been hearing, all of us, over the last 6 months, year, that actually there's a chance that he may stay in place. So that set of leaders, the reform leaders, if you want to think about it, the ones who came post-scandal, the ones who put things like term limits and good governance practice in, looks like, as Zieg says, plus ça change, even if ça change did happen on the docket, on like documents and reform processes and stories we all covered. Does it almost feel like a waste of ink now, looking at what's happened?
Well, there's a different interpretation of what is placed in the ink. Some say the term limit is 12 years, others 3 4-year terms, and then saying a term only counts if you start a full one, which no one did around 2016 after the scandals, because they were inheriting from Platini in UEFA's sense and from Blatter in FIFA's terms as well.
But when we say it's hardly like they inherited just like the fag end of these terms. I mean, some of these guys had like 3 years and 7 months as well. So, it's also keeping in the spirit of good governance. And, I don't want to, this is the example I'll give is Schäferin, actually, because he literally said in an interview, whatever whatever the rules may state, whatever, I just want to make it clear these are his words, that I believe in these term limits, and this first term will count when he first came into the office. Now, it's funny, you know, one of the things about power might be, you know, I don't know how us three would react or anyone else. Once you get put into that seat, once you keep flying around the world on private jets, once you keep meeting all these world leaders, once you hand trophies to the biggest competitions out to stadiums full of people, you might end up liking it and think, God, I really don't want to give this up. But maybe that's the point of the rules.
It'd be interesting to see in 2031, despite having the extended term limit, when Gianni Infantino is due to step down, it's, you know, this is because he spends his whole time not just, you know, flying around the world, meeting football leaders. He's going to meet heads of state. He's meeting the Pope. He's meeting, going to Davos and things like that. And is he going to be happy just to take a back seat? That will be a very interesting one.
He'll be quite young as well, won't he? He's not like Blatter was almost 80 or in his 80s when the scandal struck him. Infantino is going to be relatively young, and I think I still want to be a consequential person, as is the other guys we've discussed, Domínguez, Jeffrey. These are young people comparatively. So that's another element with what happens next.
And this is the week when Gianni Infantino's empire building really takes shape, because he inherited the national team World Cups. He's made them bigger, but the Club World Cup really has been his pet project, ensuring that eventually we'll probably have a FIFA major event every summer. So this year in the past, if the Confederations Cups had still exist, we would have still have had that as the warm-up event for the World Cup. But this weekend, it is the new 32-team mega Club World Cup across 11 cities in the United States. We've talked about it for so long, throughout the entire duration of this podcast over 5 years. But now it's finally happening. And now we'll know, does the world want it?
When you try and bring in a new competition of this size, it's inevitable that there are going to be struggles because people aren't tuned into it. I'm just trying to think of a sort of, if there's an equivalent in any other sport trying to bring in this new tournament. I know that Michael Johnson is trying to bring in this Grand Slam athletics this year. That's run into trouble as well. And I think it's not easy. And but, you know, at least FIFA have given it everything, that's for sure.
I suppose the two recent football tournament editions were in UEFA, the Nations League, which was pretty effective, wasn't it, in 2018-19, that first edition, and also the Conference League as well.
Michel Platini was the front man of the Nations League, and I think that's been really successful. But I think that was fixing a problem that really existed, those international friendly matches, need for maybe some competitive tension, and that's proven for me to be a really good success. On the Club World Cup, in my bones, I think the idea, it's not a bad one to have a World Cup of clubs, and I think with the right intentions and the right executions, without, you know, overblowing everything and making this forcing it down people, making this multi-billion event immediately, I think from a footballing sense, and to grow interest in different teams and to have a competition for club fans is quite good, maybe, if executed the right way. But the issue, partly, and this is not only FIFA's fault as well, I also want to say the European clubs, these big European clubs, the demand and the voracious appetite for huge amounts of money being funneled into them is also a big part of this problem. This prize, you know, we won't get out of bed for less than $100 million type of behavior is what gets us into this stuff. And it's not only FIFA to blame here. We have to look at the clubs almost demanding huge recompense for this, saying, look, fans only come to watch us, viewers only come to watch us. But, you know, football's built over a very long time, club football as well, over 100 years, on the shoulders of all sorts of teams and all sorts of culture. And these are the people benefiting now. I think the story to be told should have been better, both from FIFA and the club. This looks like a cash grab, doesn't it? What we talked about, DAZN billion, Saudi billion, 2 billion. We've not talked about football and the actual, you know, the beauty of of the concept that could be possible.
And if we're saying FIFA has a right to organise a Club World Cup, then they have to try and find a space in the calendar. And at some point, it's going to be pretty congested. So players are going to be tired from European clubs going into this tournament. Manchester City and Chelsea have both played nearly 60 games. Their national team players could have had up to 10 matches throughout the year as well. So the question is, if you are going to have one, does it have to be smaller? And there's already suggestions it could jump from 32 to 48 teams as well. So does something have to give? Does something in domestic football or continental football have to go smaller if you're going to have a World Cup of club size?
But you should be able to discuss it. And this is, again, you can take aim at FIFA for imposing this. They are the world's supreme body. They have so much power over the calendar, if you want, for one thing, and generally over football. I mean, they even changed transfer rules for their event. They've changed all sorts of things that suit them. This is the wider question of, should you have, and you should, for the modern game, have stakeholders inside the conversation? If it involves leagues and clubs and players, have them in the room before you impose this type of event on them.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't exactly impose it, because European clubs could have just not participated, as I think was being referenced by Gianni Infantino this week to AFP when he talked about not all European teams wanting to take part in the first men's national team World Cup in 1930, which was in Uruguay.
Let's make no bones about this. We have to be very, very, very clear. These European teams shook FIFA down for maximum cash for them. This isn't like these European teams really want to play here. They really want the money, and like, we have to be really clear when we talk about this stuff. And they do deserve attention. And I'm sure there's teams that are now with their hands on the glass, looking in, saying we want a pot of that cash as well. And there's talk about this being a biennial event, maybe. And it's not for football reasons. That's the point. It's to get wealthier and wealthier.
Do we really think that it can become a biennial event or 48 teams? I mean, it's already quite a massive impact. I mean, we're talking 4 weeks. I think actually the competition, I know it's like a traditional 32 team run, it works quite well, but I think there could have been a shorter version of it and still had, all those top sides in it.
You mean a European Champions League on tour?
No, but something, like maybe like, why not a straight knockout competition or something like that, or which would actually be much more exciting in a way than these group games. And the other thing, if you go to 48 teams, that's going to be even longer, even more demanding. If you go through 2 years, I mean, that's just like that really does basically the players involved in that, they just won't get any time off ever.
And if you start with a smaller version, perhaps it's less contentious and divisive within the game. You then introduce it, you get people used to it, and once you've got it bedded into the calendar, then you expand it rather than being this mammoth thing, and you cause all sorts of complaints from the unions. Although, interestingly, we are now over a year since FIFPro lodged their complaint officially to the European Commission. I think technically FIFPro Europe, along with the likes of the Premier League. The European Commission haven't said they're going to take up that complaint, and here we are with the Club World Cup starting, their complaint being about an abuse of dominance in the market by FIFA to get this new Club World Cup, which is endangering health of players, as they say it.
The European Commission is not going to take a speedy decision because there's a tournament happening. These things can take years to happen because they're based on, if it's going to the ECJ, 15 judges, the Advocate General's opinion, and all of that. Guys, we're old enough to remember the Club World Cup causing controversy in the past, particularly in the UK. Manchester United going to Brazil for a tournament, a Club World Cup, missing the FA Cup. So this tournament has stirred passions and controversy in the past as well. Gabriele Marcotti reminded us recently that there was even a larger version planned in the early 2000s for Spain. There was even a draw that took place, and then FIFA effectively couldn't fund it. But this time, even when it looked pretty bleak for Gianni Infantino, honestly, without Saudi Arabia coming to the rescue, or DAZN, this thing might have been a real bust as well. Gianni Infantino has got quite lucky as well with how this thing has been funded. I think we were in Doha in 2019, and the Club World Cup was going to be in China in 2021, and they hadn't got any broadcast partners. And we said, "Have you had any expressions of interest?" And he said, "Oh my God, yeah, loads. There's like 11 or 20. He said that we were coming out of our ears, these expressions of interest. All the TV companies want this. I'm not saying he was telling us a fib, but what I would love to know is what changed between all of those TV companies apparently falling over themselves to give him a lot of money for a tournament in China, and almost no one willing to give him a penny for this one in the US until this DAZN rescue.
Yeah,
well, obviously something did change. Obviously, the landscape did change with the outbreak of the pandemic in China, which then led to the Club World Cup no longer being able to happen in 2021 because of the pandemic. And then seemingly China's interest waned as Xi Jinping has his interest in football decline. Then the Saudis rose to the fore, bailing out FIFA. But of course, on the broadcasting landscape as well, the pandemic impacted many businesses around the world. So perhaps it'd been very different if we had a Club World Cup in the United States in, say, 2021 and there hadn't been a pandemic with companies hit financially. But they have struggled, haven't they?
Probably the key thing for Infantino was getting the backing of the European Club Association in 2023. That sort of changed everything. But they still struggled a lot to get the broadcast partners and to get sponsors and ticket sales. So everything has been very last minute in a way. Lots of the sponsorship deals are just days before the start of the tournament, including the Saudi Public Investment Fund. I mean, are they sponsoring this tournament in order to get people to invest in the Saudi PIF or buy? Do you want to buy a Saudi PIF bag, Tariq?
Well, look, they're available at all good stockists. No. See, they're also. I mean, this Saudi Arabia, and this is the other thing I've noticed. Football hasn't really complained that much about Saudi Arabia in the way they did about Qatar in the beginning, because Qatar laid the framework. Football leagues, federations, clubs even, got really rich off the back of Qatar getting the World Cup in 2022. And initially there were complaints about the things like Winter World Cup. With Saudi, there's been nothing, because they're expecting this tap to open, and it has, hasn't it? So at the same time as the Club World Cup taking place in the United States, it's also the CONCACAF Gold Cup, which is the regional tournament for North and Central America and the Caribbean. It's taking place exactly the same time in the US. But there's another team in the competition as well, isn't from anywhere there. Saudi Arabia in the competition. And I think 4 of CONCACAF sponsors are Saudi Arabian. PIF sponsoring that one as well. Aramco, etc. So, they are buying their way into the hearts of football leaders all over the world.
For very simple terms, particularly, say, for a lot of our listeners in the UK, say we're in 2028 and the UK is hosting the European Championship with Ireland, and then FIFA holds a Club World Cup at the exact same time that might take players away from playing in the Euros for their clubs. And that's the situation
Weston
we're in.
McKennie and Tim Weah, I think, are going to be playing for Juventus in the Club World Cup instead of playing for the United States of America. What would the papers be saying here if Jude Bellingham and Trent Alexander-Arnold were playing for Real Madrid and not for England?
You're probably saying...
Well, it has happened with the under-21 Euros, because Joe Bellingham's not gone with the under-21s, for instance, but he is with Borussia Dortmund.
As a mate, let's keep the under-21s parked where they are. Ziggs, England national team, 2 players are off to play for their club. What would be the reaction here? You've covered the sports news in the UK for 2-3 decades. What would the reaction be like?
Well, obviously there would be uproar and huge pressure, and I'm sure the national team would hold sway. Actually, is what would happen here. So I mean, it's an intriguing one. They would probably say that the repulsive would be the headlines. Talking about Jude Bellingham, and not just Thomas Tuchel's mother.
Very good.
It's like diversion, actually. One of the teams, of course, at the Club World Cup is Real Madrid. We had Trent Alexander-Arnold being unveiled there this week, having joined from Liverpool. Never have I seen such toxicity online relating to something that is actually seemingly so good from someone speaking in Spanish and showing they've actually, particularly as us English folk, have actually gone and learnt a language and can speak in another country. But it seems so many of the Liverpool fans took against him. Like, how dare he be learning Spanish for all these years and improving himself?
Kind of this idea that British people don't speak foreign languages is allowed to become almost cliched. I'm here in London. I'm sure there's people here speaking all sorts of languages. And if the guy wanted to learn Spanish, good luck to him. Mbappe, for example, he spoke pretty fluent English, Spanish, and obviously his native French by the time he was 20. I don't know with this stuff, to be honest. The outrage.
I think. I think it's great that he learned Spanish, but I don't think it's wrong of that to be the headline. I think that's the most interesting thing that came out of this press conference.
If you're saying someone reading an auto cue, and he said he's been learning Spanish, is it that exciting? I don't know. The guy's spent a minute speaking Spanish. It must have been an extremely boring news conference for that to be the top line.
Well, what else is he going to say? I want to win trophies.
But can I flip this around a bit? If an Italian guy or a Brazilian or whoever, the Premier League's full of foreign players, when they come and they do their unveiling or whatever press conference, and they speak 100 words in English, I just cannot imagine anywhere else in the world that's going to be the main story of the day.
It is because we've not had English players going abroad really speaking in foreign languages. Eric Dyer, who grew up partly in Portugal, so he could speak Portuguese. Roy Hodgson, experience going around, does he speak French? David Beckham in all his years as England captain, and we're going to get to news about him later. We didn't hear him speak much Spanish, right. Maybe occasionally.
Gary Lineker learned Spanish, didn't he, when he went to Barcelona? But before that, I remember, showing my age now, when Ray Wilkins went to Italy, and there was a TV feature about him. And the presenter, and he's even learning a bit of Italian. And then you see him go to an ice cream van and goes, "Un cornetto, per favore."
Anyway, good luck to Trent Alexander-Arnold in Madrid, and let's hope that he has inspired a generation of young English school children, or even adults, to consider learning a second language.
Could you say that in Spanish, Tariq? Say that in Spanish.
That's for another podcast, and I want a fee for that.
I've got to say, Arsenal do have a language program they've run for several years, using football to motivate people to learn languages like French and German and Spanish. So maybe this is the true FIFA football uniting the world. It's actually using the power of football genuinely to try to encourage education of languages.
Can you see 2030 World Cup sponsor Duolingo? Heard it here first.
Very good.
Well, maybe the person who does set the standard, who's the role model for switching effortlessly between languages, is Gianni Infantino.
Yeah, he can speak, I don't know, 7 or something like that.
The true language he speaks is the language of football, as he keeps telling us. And this is now the Club World Cup, and he's going to get his big show alongside Donald Trump. He's already taken the Club World Cup to the Oval Office. It's been sitting there for 3 months now, there for all the big announcements, perched alongside Trump's desk in the Oval Office. But now it comes down to the actual football, the quality, and maybe people start to realise the team's missing. And while Infantino keeps saying we have the 32 best teams in the world, that's clearly not the case because, for instance, as we say, Barcelona aren't there, as one example.
Liverpool, Napoli, the champions of Italy, England and Spain, are not there.
No, the reason they're not there is because, despite the fact they have high European rankings, there is a cap on the number of teams per country of 2. So the winners of the 4 Champions Leagues from 2021 until 2024, they get automatically qualified. And then, so for example, Manchester City and Chelsea both qualified from winning the Champions League, which meant despite Liverpool having probably a better European ranking than at least Chelsea, they don't get to go. And similarly, Barcelona, I think, because they've lost out to Real Madrid and then Atletico.
Is it right? The only way you can break through that coefficient rule is if you actually won the tournament. That's why I think there are 4 teams from Brazil, because they won the Copa Libertadores, are going to be in the competition, and which is slightly different. 3 teams from the US, because you have one host country slot as well. So two US teams are there, and an extra one as well.
I don't know, or was it due to I think that might have been UEFA's stipulation for agreeing to sort of withdraw their opposition. I think they insisted on that cap, didn't they? Because they wanted it to be spread around more. So that's perhaps why it doesn't.
Originally, there was a suggestion to have the Europa League winners in it, as well as the Champions League winners.
Yeah, you just reminded me of how tough it was to get European UEFA support for this competition. There was a lot of tension, and you're right. There was talk about 4 Europa League teams and then 4 Champions League level teams. And again, there's a sense that goes into the heart of UEFA maybe not wanting this competition to be hugely successful, in a sense that it might detract from what is the world's premier club competition, which is Champions League. If this thing had even more of these top teams in it, maybe it would be even more popular and then steal some of the limelight.
I had forgotten until I looked up now that when we were in Miami in 2019 for that FIFA Council meeting that approved the introduction of the Club World Cup, a 24-team Club World Cup, the European Club Association were completely opposed still at that point. There was a letter that they wrote to FIFA. It was signed by the then head, Andrea Agnelli, how things changed, the then Juventus boss, who was forced out of him in the Super League debacle. And the ECA said no European teams would participate in this edition in 2021, and they urged FIFA to postpone any decision until such a moment when the legitimate concerns and interests of the European clubs have been properly addressed. So interestingly, remember, they went ahead with approving it without European backing.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what changed, but I suspect the promise of large amounts of money, do you think, for individual clubs?
And of course, the change of power. Then it was Agnelli out. In comes Nasser Al-Khelaifi in 2021 in the debris of the Super League collapsing as the new European Club Association boss. And of course, Paris Saint-Germain have qualified due to the coefficient ranking. Next time they're in it due to winning the Champions League.
Yeah, I think there was also probably at that time the opposition from within UEFA was huge, because Infantino originally talked about having a global nations league as well, and there was lots of concern for sure that this would directly affect the status of the Champions League, UEFA's Nations League, perhaps the Euros as well. So that I think that's probably that the landscape shifted. I think when perhaps that all fell by the wayside, and it was a sort of more modest proposal put forward by FIFA.
Yeah. Also, FIFA has suffered several other defeats and had to push back from Biennial World Cup, all sorts of other. You have to look at all of these things in the round, haven't you? And they've come to an accommodation. Rob and I had been at council meetings of FIFA when UEFA president and the FIFA president didn't even speak to each other, didn't acknowledge each other. So, how times have changed.
Well, it will inevitably focus on the football at some point, and it won't be the media to blame if fans aren't interested. And, we see a lot of influencers being used to try and drum up that support and interest just to build excitement. DAZN putting clips on things like Gary Lineker's podcast, the video version. Done deals with TikTok and the like. So I think we'll see a lot of clips from the tournament. So I think there'll be really high visibility. But the question is how many people watch full matches? Because it's DAZN, we probably won't see the numbers necessarily because they're not ranked through traditional broadcast rating platforms like we have Barn.
But it's on also sub-licensed to national broadcasters. I think in the United States, where probably, maybe in South America as well, they have decent numbers in South America. TNT will have it in North America. And Channel 5, very famous for showing football on Thursday nights in the past in England, has the rights in the UK.
Channel 5, which actually helped to use some football from the late 90s to build itself up when it was a new channel. Interestingly, what has helped the Club World Cup perhaps get more coverage in the days before this first match are the controversies, the Trump-related controversies, the immigration protests in Los Angeles, the concerns about the actions of federal authorities potentially if they do target any visiting fans. It has actually led to more discussion and probably awareness about the Club World Cup while these concerns have been raised.
Yeah, I was going to make exactly that same point. If it hadn't been for these controversies, would anyone actually have been talking about it? So, yeah, poor ticket sales, reduced ticket sales, ways of filling the stadiums. But I think my favourite story is the Customs and Border Patrol posting on social media saying we're going to be at these matches. Obviously causing quite a bit of concern. People thought they're going to have their collars felt, so these fans turning up, and then it's Adam Crafton from The Athletic reported that actually FIFA intervened to get that post removed.
Well, to be fair, some of these fans have genuine feelings about this and fears. I spoke to Flamengo supporters who are really, really excited. That's the other thing. While it might not be seen as a big deal in Europe in some quarters, in South America, it's a massive deal. Flamengo are very, very excited. Their supporters are. So there is a lot of Brazilians living in the US, a big diaspora in Massachusetts, for example, and they were planning to go in convoy, have live events around it. But I spoke to the organizer, a guy called Manny Mezet, about this, and he said, absolutely not. We're not doing this because I can't have it on my conscience that a bus that I've arranged or an event I've arranged is raided by immigration enforcement authorities and people are removed, arrested, or even deported or put in prison because of something I've done. And for some people, this is the trade-off. This is the backdoor. So, Manny, you're going to go to the games. And he said, because he loves this team. So he's going to go in his own car, low profile, go to the games and watch it. So this is a genuine fear for a lot of people, given the rhetoric and what people are seeing in the US with people being snatched off the street.
I can quite understand why people may not want to take their risk and put friends and family in uncomfortable positions. And it's definitely something which should be on people's minds too for the World Cup and the USA, as well as Mexico and Canada next year.
Well, obviously, we'll wait to see if Donald Trump does go to any matches. He's got a big event of his own this weekend, Donald Trump.
A massive military parade, the likes of which we usually see in places like North Korea or Russia, a big show of hardware on the streets of Washington. But he's already had his hands on the trophy, hasn't he?
Yeah, that's been in the Oval Office. When we referenced that post that was removed from the authority that might have scared fans, maybe that's an example of why Gianni Infantino is pursuing this alliance with Donald Trump, because it does lead to perhaps rapid decision-making. It removes anything that might be damaging for the tournament, anything that would deter fans. The fact he's got that route direct to the top of the Oval Office, other members of FIFA as well, heavily in the Trump administration. And
delete that text, bro. Did you think that's what he sent him a message? Could be.
Well, that's what he referred to, didn't he? When I think you asked him that question in Belfast, Rob, and he did sort of refer to that. That is important to have these top level relationships. And so it probably is helpful if there are issues like that, and you can just send a direct message on Truth Social, and Bob's your uncle.
Why aren't we on Truth Social yet? That'd be one to ask. Why aren't FIFA on Truth Social?
Are they not?
Well, we have to check. Maybe we need to be on there. Get ourselves seen and heard in the White House. But you might have been a bit negative there towards Donald Trump's military parade, the sort of pageantry to celebrate his birthday. This weekend in London is Trooping the Colour, the ceremony that marks the sovereign's official birthday. And along with that, King Charles's birthday honours list.
Arise, Sir Bex. The honours list, strange thing, especially perhaps if you're not British, and perhaps strange if you are for some people anyway. But yeah, this twice a year, this list comes out of honours, officially sort of awarded by the king, but actually the government plays a big role in deciding who gets these honours. And Beckham, who's been trying for years and years to get a knighthood, has finally got one. More importantly, from my point of view, Rugby League has got its first ever knight. There have been dozens of rugby union knights because they're the sort of posh part of rugby. Rugby League is much more working class. Billy Boston has got that, and there's also an MBE for 17-year-old darts player Luke Littler.
It does raise questions about what it takes to earn an honour, what they should be awarded for. Some say it should be for something extraordinary, maybe beyond your everyday job, some sort of work in the community, some charity work, some big endeavour. But we have over the years got used to them now being given to sports stars, Olympians. Winning gold isn't enough. It's what honour will they get next as well.
Rob, do you want to tell us a little about Billy Boston? Because I think a lot of people wouldn't have heard of this man. Presumably he has left an indelible mark on the sport of rugby league. Do you want to tell us who he is?
So Billy Boston, he's 90 years old now. So actually, it's probably decades overdue. But so he is probably one of the pioneering black sportsmen of British sport in the 1950s, early 1950s. He was born in Cardiff, and due to sort of racial prejudice, he wasn't given a place at one of the leading Welsh rugby union clubs, and instead was signed by Wigan Rugby League. Went on to score 478 tries and 483 appearances. I think a record that will never be beaten. Played for Great Britain, one of the first black sportsmen to play for Great Britain, and including winning the Rugby League World Cup. And somebody who, had he been a rugby union player, would undoubtedly have been knighted. But this has finally changed.
A pioneer.
I mean, Keir Starmer's Prime Minister saying that an historic wrong was being corrected. The fact rugby league had been overlooked, that some sort of snobbishness, the fact it's seen as more of a working class northern sport, whereas rugby union is seen as the sort of posher southern sport almost.
I think that has to be the only explanation, really. And we've seen with like Kevin Sinfield, not just his playing career as a rugby league player, but the sort of huge work he's done for motor neurone disease awareness with around his friend Rob Burrow, the Leeds Rhinos player who died from the condition fairly recently. There's been absolutely constant calls for him to be knighted. It never happened, but I think it will happen now next year.
Be well deserved. I mean, it's an incredible campaign, and those efforts have been seen by millions all across the UK.
And David Beckham is being honoured in part for his work with UNICEF, which is
I think
done for many years.
Since 2005, he's been their ambassador. And he's also more recently worked for the King's Foundation. That can't have harmed his chances. But it took a long time because there were issues for many years over his what was seen as possibly not being that willing to pay the right amount of tax. He was cleared of that in 2021. But before that, Tariq, there was a leak of an email he sent. It was absolutely using unprintable, unsayable words about the government for refusing to give him the knighthood.
Can we get the bleep machine going again, Rob? Bleep, 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 bleep. He was it just the government or was it the royal family? So they've clearly buried the hatchet after being called a bunch of bleeps. So he has finally been knighted. Very good.
Well, it's probably helped the fact that Beckham secured himself invites to various events with King Charles, and last year the state dinner for the visit of the Emir of Qatar. Also, when Charles held an Anglo-Italian night at his Highgrove home, Beckham was there, and in some ways might have been useful for the King in bringing more coverage to some of those events, which keeps the monarchy in the headlines because they need to stay relevant. So, maybe even the monarchy effectively use form of influencers.
And an example to young footballers. Learn languages and maybe play in another country. Beckham had obviously played in AC Milan. He'd played for Qatar's PSG. But, if you widen your circles, kids, you may get a knighthood.
Excellent. And Gianni Infantino, if Beckham's going to be there for the Inter Miami opening match, and Gianni can say, Sir David.
He does like the pomp and splendour now, doesn't he, Gianni, to be fair?
Yeah, maybe an honorary knighthood heading his way for the World Cup in Britain in years to come. Well, we finally made it. Club World Cup weekend after many years of talking about it. And I think really it's a question of wait and see. And it might take some years just to work out how effective it is as a competition. But I don't think we're going to be writing it off straight away.
I hope it's not too disruptive to all the leagues with all the money being flown out the door there. I hope it's very successful from a footballing point of view. It would be nice to see Boca Juniors or River Plate, Flamengo go deep into the competition. We could get some good stories when we talk about this in a month's time.
Yeah, and a chance to see players gain a platform that they wouldn't usually, and maybe it'll help them secure big transfers, although that would be a bit of a talent drain from their own countries that they're currently playing in now and those clubs. So we wouldn't want it to cement the European dominance of the game, probably, if we're adopting that sort of FIFA sort of viewpoint as how they believe this competition.
No, good. It'd be really good, wouldn't it, if you got to a situation where you had the semi-finals with 2 European clubs and 2 non-European clubs.
Well, we'll wait to see, and as ever, we welcome your feedback at Sport Unlocked on all the social platforms. And as ever, if you rate, review, and subscribe to us, it helps to spread the word. And now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.